The sound of his laughter cut deeper than any knife ever could. It wasn't loud, just a sharp, careless chuckle. But in that moment, it echoed through my chest like a verdict. I stood there holding an empty smile, my hands still trembling from offering the gift, while my daughter's husband tilted the box, peeked inside, and decided my effort was a joke unworthy of respect. I had saved for months, skipped my own medicine some weeks, walked instead of taking the bus. Every small sacrifice was wrapped carefully into that modest box. It wasn't expensive, but it was chosen with love, with thought, with a mother's quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, I would still matter in my daughter's new life. I told myself that intentions carried weight, that sincerity always found its place. I was wrong. We were all gathered in his living room, his house, his rules. The walls gleamed with expensive frames and modern furniture that screamed success. I felt small there, like an old photograph placed among glossy magazines. When my turn came, I stepped forward, heart pounding like a nervous child. My daughter smiled politely, distracted. He took the box from my hands, shook it once, raised an eyebrow, and laughed. "What is this?" he said, not even bothering to lower his voice. "You shouldn't have wasted your money." Before I could explain, before I could even breathe properly, he tossed the box into the trash bin near the door. Just like that. No pause. No second thought. My gift landed on discarded wrappers and empty bottles, buried under his indifference. The room went silent, but not in my favor. No one spoke up. No one reached for the box. My daughter didn't meet my eyes. She stood frozen, trapped between the man she married and the woman who gave her life. In that silence, something inside me cracked, not loudly, but completely. I felt heat rise to my face, then drain away, leaving behind a cold hollowness. Years of motherhood flashed before me, night fevers, school uniforms washed by hand, meals eaten last so others could eat first. Was this what it all amounted to? Being laughed at? Being thrown away like an inconvenience? I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. I smiled. I said nothing. Pain has a strange way of teaching restraint. In that moment, I realized that reacting would only give him more power. Tears would entertain him. Anger would justify his cruelty. So I swallowed everything, my humiliation, my heartbreak, my dignity, and turned it into silence. As I walked out of that house, my steps were steady, but inside I was collapsing. Each breath felt heavier than the last. Outside, the evening air was cool, but it didn't soothe the fire burning in my chest. I sat on the bus stop bench and stared at my hands, still shaped as if they were holding the box. That night, sleep didn't come. I replayed the scene over and over, the laugh, the throw, the silence. Pain settled into me like an unwelcome guest, refusing to leave. But beneath that pain, something else was forming. A quiet awareness. A realization that respect is never begged for, and dignity, once trampled, must be reclaimed, not with noise, but with purpose. I didn't know it yet, but the pain he gifted me that day would become the foundation of everything that followed. The humiliation didn't end when I left his house. Pain rarely travels alone, it invites witnesses. By morning, the story had already found its way into places I couldn't escape. A neighbor called to ask, with fake concern wrapped in curiosity, whether it was true that my gift had been so useless it went straight into the trash. Another relative messaged me laughing emojis, followed by, "Don't take it personally, times have changed." Each word felt like salt rubbed into an open wound. I realized then that his laughter hadn't been private cruelty. It had been a performance, and I was the punchline. 2 days later, there was a family gathering, his mother's birthday. I considered not going. Every instinct told me to stay home, to protect what little was left of my pride. But absence, I knew, would be interpreted as guilt. So I went, dressed simply, spine straight, heart braced. The moment I entered, conversations dipped. Eyes followed me. I felt them measuring me, reducing me to a story already told incorrectly. He sat at the center, relaxed, confident, telling someone loudly how some people don't understand quality, how sentimental junk just creates clutter. His voice carried. He wanted it to. Then he saw me. "Ah, here she is," he said, smiling without warmth. "Don't worry, I cleaned up that trash already." Laughter rippled through the room, uneasy, forced, but still laughter. My daughter's face flushed. She tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. I stood there, exposed, as if my worth had been placed on display and judged inferior. I felt small again, but this time it was different. This wasn't shock. This was awareness. He wasn't just disrespecting a gift, he was asserting dominance. He wanted everyone to see that I had no place, no authority, no value in his world. Someone handed me a cup of tea. Their hand trembled more than mine. "Ignore him," they whispered. But humiliation doesn't disappear when ignored. It settles into the bones. Throughout the evening, the jokes continued. Casual remarks, side glances, stories exaggerated for effect. Each one chipped away at the image of me I had spent a lifetime building. A mother, a woman of self-respect, someone who mattered. I answered politely when spoken to. I smiled when expected. Inside, something hardened. When it was time to leave, my daughter walked me to the door. She avoided my eyes, murmured an apology that sounded practiced and thin. I wanted to tell her everything, to ask how she could let this happen. Instead, I squeezed her hand and said, "Take care of yourself." The words tasted bitter, but they were honest. On the way home, the city lights blurred through the bus window. I wasn't crying anymore. Tears had given way to clarity. Public humiliation has a cruel gift. It strips illusions. I saw him clearly now. I saw the silence of others just as clearly. And most painfully, I saw my own mistake, believing kindness alone earns respect. By the time I reached my door, I had made a quiet decision. I would not explain myself. I would not defend my gift. I would not ask for understanding. Humiliation had taken enough from me. What remained, I would guard carefully. Silence, I realized, was not surrender. It was preparation. After that night, I disappeared, not physically, but deliberately. I stopped calling. I stopped checking in. I let birthdays pass with simple messages instead of visits. When invitations came, I replied late or not at all. Silence became my shield, smooth and uncracked, hiding everything that still ached underneath. People noticed. They always do when you withdraw your warmth. Some assumed I was sulking. Others said I was being dramatic. A few even suggested I apologize, as if dignity were a misunderstanding that needed correction. I listened to none of it. Silence had taught me something important. When you stop reacting, you start observing. From a distance, I watched my daughter's life unfold. Her voice on the phone grew thinner, less certain. Conversations became shorter. She spoke more about schedules than feelings. I never asked questions that might force her to defend him. I knew that battle wasn't mine to fight, not yet. And him, he flourished in the absence of resistance. Confidence fed on applause, and without me there to mock, he found other ways to perform. Social media posts, carefully staged success, smiling photos that screamed perfection. But beneath it all, I sensed something restless. People who need to belittle others are rarely at peace. My silence unnerved him more than any confrontation ever could have. He mentioned me occasionally, always lightly, always with a joke. "She's old-fashioned. She's sensitive." Each comment was bait. I refused to take it. In the quiet, I turned inward. I reopened drawers long ignored. Papers, documents, memories. I organized my life with the same care I once gave to my family. There were things I had postponed, decisions I had avoided because they felt uncomfortable. Now, discomfort felt familiar, manageable. One evening, while sorting through old files, I found the receipt for the gift. I hadn't planned to keep it. I didn't even remember slipping it into that folder. I stared at the date, the careful handwriting, the modest amount. My fingers traced the paper slowly. That box hadn't been trash. It had been a test, and he had failed it spectacularly. I placed the receipt back, not with anger, but with intention. Weeks passed, then months. Silence stretched, but it didn't weaken me, it sharpened me. Without constant noise, patterns emerged. I noticed who checked on me without needing gossip, who respected my boundaries, who only appeared when there was something to gain. I adjusted accordingly. Then, one afternoon, my daughter came to see me unannounced. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally. She sat at my table, wrapped her hands around a cup of tea, and stared into it as if answers might rise with the steam. "He's under a lot of stress," she said suddenly. "Work isn't going well." I nodded, said nothing. He's talking about investments, big ones. Her voice wavered. He says it's our chance to move ahead. I still said nothing. She looked up then, finally meeting my eyes. There was something there, uncertainty, maybe fear. She wanted reassurance, permission, a rescue. But silence held me steady. I understood now that words given too early can become weapons used against you. When she left, she hugged me tightly, as if afraid I might disappear completely. I held her, kissed her hair, and let her go. That night, I made a decision. Silence had done its work. It had revealed weaknesses, misplaced confidence, and the dangerous arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. The balance was shifting. And he didn't even feel it yet. Power doesn't announce itself when it changes hands. It moves quietly, almost politely, while everyone is busy looking the other way. By the time they notice, it's already too late. The first real shift came through a phone call I almost didn't answer. An unfamiliar number, a hesitant voice on the other end, his business partner. We had met only once briefly, when introductions were made and egos measured. He sounded careful now, respectful in a way I hadn't heard before. I didn't know who else to call, he said. You've always been practical. Practical, the word landed softly, but it carried weight. He explained that a new investment had gone wrong. Funds frozen, legal complications. Temporary, he insisted, but his voice betrayed him. They needed liquidity, fast. I listened, asked no questions, gave no advice. Silence again, but this time it wasn't empty, it was calculated. A week later, my daughter returned, eyes red, confidence shaken. He needs help, she said quietly. Just a loan, short term. I looked at her, really looked at her. The girl I raised was standing in front of me, torn between love and fear. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I asked for time. That night, I opened accounts I hadn't touched in years. Small amounts, carefully preserved, nothing flashy, enough. Money has a way of revealing truth when it's placed between people. When I finally agreed, I did it on my terms. Contracts, conditions, transparency, no shortcuts, no assumptions. He didn't like it, but he had no choice. Desperation makes even proud men bend. The day he came to my house to sign the papers, the air felt different. He sat where I gestured, spoke when I allowed. The laughter was gone. In its place was restraint, wrapped tightly around fear. He avoided my eyes as he signed. As weeks passed, the dependence deepened. Updates came regularly now. Respectful, careful. Every conversation reminded him, subtly, that the ground beneath his feet was no longer solid without me. I didn't gloat. I didn't remind him of the gift. Power doesn't need reminders. It simply exists. Then one afternoon, he asked about the box. I heard you bought something special that day, he said casually, testing the waters. I smiled just once. Yes, I replied, very special. Something flickered across his face, curiosity perhaps, or unease. He didn't press further. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the box had never been about money or sentiment. It had been about timing, about foresight, about something I had planned long before he entered our lives, back when experience had taught me to prepare for storms others couldn't imagine. The power had shifted completely now, not through force, not through revenge, through patience. And patience, when paired with truth, is unstoppable. The day everything unraveled, it didn't begin with anger or accusations. It began with panic. My phone rang just after sunrise. This time there was no hesitation in the voice, only fear stripped bare. The investment had collapsed completely. Accounts were frozen. Authorities were involved. Names were being reviewed. His name, my daughter's name. And then, in a whisper thick with dread, he asked, You knew, didn't you? I closed my eyes, breathing in slowly. I prepared, I said. There's a difference. Within hours, he was at my door, not confident, not composed. The man who once laughed stood hunched, shoulders tight, eyes darting. I invited him in, offered tea. He didn't touch it. They're saying it was fraud, he said. That will lose everything. I nodded calm. Some risks don't forgive arrogance. He ran a hand through his hair, voice cracking. "You can help us. You already have." That was when I stood and walked to the cupboard. The same one where old papers slept, untouched and underestimated. I placed a familiar box on the table between us. His eyes widened. Recognition flashed. That box. Yes. Slowly, deliberately, I opened it. Inside were documents, property deeds, investment records, legal papers, evidence of assets quietly secured years ago, protected and unlinked to his ventures. And at the center, the very contract he had signed with me, clauses he hadn't bothered to read carefully, assuming control he never truly had. His face drained of color. "You threw this away," I said softly, without looking, without asking. My daughter gasped, covering her mouth. "The funds you relied on," I continued, "were conditional. When the investigation began, those conditions activated. The risk shifted back to you, alone." Silence swallowed the room. "This isn't revenge," I added. "It's consequence." He fell back into the chair, stunned. The laughter was gone forever now. In its place was understanding, too late but complete. He had mocked foresight, disrespected patience, underestimated a woman who had survived far worse than his arrogance. And now the shock settled in. Everything he thought he controlled had been in that box, the one he threw away. The house stayed quiet long after the truth settled, not the awkward silence of before, but something heavier, final. He didn't argue, he didn't accuse. There was nothing left to say. Reality had spoken clearly enough. My daughter sat beside me, shaking. I pulled her closer, the way I used to when she was small and storms frightened her. This time, the storm was human, and it had passed through her life, leaving damage she would need time to understand. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," I replied, and I meant it. He stood slowly, no longer the man who filled rooms with noise. "I misjudged you," he said, voice low. "I thought kindness meant weakness." I met his eyes for the first time since that day. "Many people make that mistake," I said. "They usually learn too late." There was no pleasure in watching him leave. Justice doesn't feel like triumph, it feels like balance being restored. The universe doesn't shout when it corrects itself, it simply adjusts the weight. In the weeks that followed, things changed naturally. Legal processes took their course. Assets protected remained protected. Those built on arrogance crumbled. I didn't interfere. I didn't need to. The system he trusted when it served him now held him accountable. My daughter stayed with me for a while. We talked late into the nights, not about blame, but about patterns, about respect, about how love should never require shrinking yourself to survive. Slowly, her shoulders straightened again. Slowly, her voice found strength. As for him, he learned silence the hard way. Invitations stopped coming. Laughter no longer followed him. People who once praised him now kept distance. Not because I spoke, but because truth has a way of traveling without assistance. One afternoon, months later, he returned. Not to ask for help, not to argue, just to return something. The box. It was dented, scratched, but intact. "I should have looked," he said simply. "Yes," I replied, "you should have." That was all. After he left, I placed the box back where it belonged, not as a trophy, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. Not for him. For me. A reminder that dignity doesn't need to be loud. That patience outlasts cruelty. That moral justice isn't about punishment, it's about lessons delivered at the right moment, in the right measure. People often think power comes from money, status, or noise. They're wrong. Real power comes from knowing who you are, protecting what matters, and never underestimating quiet strength. He laughed once and threw my gift away. But in that box was not just paper or plans. It was foresight, it was boundaries, it was consequence. And in the end, it gave everyone exactly what they deserved.